Hello again. It's great that you're logging on to this podcast. And if you've stayed with us for 5 episodes, well, congratulations. The book of Revelation is a bit of a cross-country marathon, and the sections in the middle feel very boggy. I admit they feel rather like that to me. It's not an easy book to grapple with, but I hope we can make it a bit clearer. I'm David Parsons, and once again Richard Harniess is with me as we launch into the second half of this 10-episode series. Richard, these central chapters of Revelation, with all their confusing images of things I'd rather not think about, is a challenging read, isn't it?
Yes, David, thanks for inviting me back. It is indeed. It's a very tricky section. But at the beginning, we're told that it's of great significance. So there was something that God really wanted the 7 churches to understand. At this period of their history, perhaps they were the epicenter of the Western Church. Rome had the church decimated. The sacking of Jerusalem had scattered the Christians from Israel. And so after about AD 73-45, things had settled down in terms of persecution, but now there was this new wave of persecution after about 20 years of peace. And God really wanted them to recognize what was behind this kind of attack. There was a wider context of the devil's activity, and here we're definitely looking at a view from a different place. It's the devil's activity and how he manipulates the powers of the day towards destroying God's plans and purposes. But the great truth that is coming through is that he will be defeated and God's plan of victory will be worked out. And we can also see, in an allegorical kind of metaphorical way, the continual battle against evil that the church of all ages is having to face.
Yes, the various rooms in John's art gallery, we were thinking of it in the early stages as an art gallery, they may depict images that are hard to look at. But as followers of Jesus, we're not actually called to live in a comfortable bubble, ignoring the sufferings and the evils of the world, but we're encouraged to engage with them, to work to change what we can, and to bring the good news. And this section of the art gallery may be disturbing at times, but remember that when we get to the final room in the gallery, we'll find it's full of glorious light and pictures that are overflowing with beauty and astonishing colour and radiant joy and delighted wonder. And remember, we're not so much looking at a calendar of awful events to come, but rather we're taking a realistic look at the way things are and have been through history. And we're trying to look through the lens of God's plan to reconcile everything in creation to himself. So let's listen to chapter 12 as Breda King reads it for us. Thanks, Breda.
Then I witnessed in heaven an event of great significance. I saw a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon beneath her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant, and she cried out because of her labour pains and the agony of giving birth. Then I witnessed in heaven another significant event. I saw a large red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, with 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept away 1/3 of the stars in the sky, and he threw them to the earth. He stood in front of the woman as she was about to give birth, ready to devour her baby as soon as it was born. She gave birth to a son, who was to rule all nations with an iron rod. And her child was snatched away from the dragon and was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where God had prepared a place to care for her 1,260 days. Then there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, and the dragon lost the battle, and he and his angels were forced out of heaven. This great dragon, the ancient serpent, called the devil, or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all his angels. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens, "It has come at last, salvation and power, and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to earth, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. And they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb, and by their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in the heavens, rejoice. But terror will come on the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing that he has little time." Then the dragon realized that he had been thrown down to the earth. He pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child, but she was given 2 wings, like those of a great eagle, so she could fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness. There she would be cared for and protected from the dragon for a time, times, and half a time. Then the dragon tried to drown the woman with a flood of water that flowed from his mouth. But the earth helped her by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that gushed out from the mouth of the dragon. And the dragon was angry at the woman and declared war against the rest of her children, all who kept God's commandments and maintained their testimony for Jesus. Then the dragon took his stand on the shore beside the sea.
So here's a question for groups. How did this vivid picture make you feel? Does the image of the dragon threatening the newborn remind you of anything in the Christmas story? The picture here is of 2 contrasting characters. They couldn't be more different. The first is a figure absolutely full of light, clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, wearing a crown of 12 stars. Beauty, light, but also a sense of vulnerability. She's about to deliver a child. And then the second character is a symbol of raw power and malevolence, this great red dragon, as ugly as the woman is beautiful. And we hold our breath as we watch. What chance will her newborn baby stand faced with the slavering jaws of the dragon? Now, we don't need to guess the identity of the child. Clearly, it's Christ. And we're told the dragon's name. No surprise here. It's Satan, the devil, the deceiver of the whole world. So who is the woman? I think she has echoes of Eve, and particularly of the Virgin Mary. But remembering that this is symbolism and not really literal, it's most likely that she represents something wider. We have 12 stars and 12 tribes of Israel, so I think she represents Israel because it was Israel through whom Christ came, but more precisely, the whole people of God in every age. And this is the horror movie version of the conflict between good and evil. It's been going on ever since the Garden of Eden. Indeed, even before. We're told that the battlefield was first in heaven, where the devil lost, and then the earth, where we know from the end of the book he will also lose. But there's no doubt about the ferocity of the conflict. But the dragon is repeatedly denied the prey he longs to kill. The child snatched almost out of his jaws. So he turns his hatred to the woman. First she flees and eludes him, that's verse 6. Then she's given wings to escape him again, that's verse 14. And then the dragon tries to drown her, but the earth swallows up the flood he spews out of his mouth. it kind of reminds me of a Tom and Jerry cartoon, one thing after the other going wrong. It is all a bit comic book, isn't it, Richard?
Yes, I was thinking of a souped-up version of Tom and Jerry as well, where Tom's traps and attempts to get the upper hand always get turned against him, and Jerry gets away with it. But it's much more serious than that, really, isn't it? Even though it's a coded message of history. I see the 7 crowns as perhaps the political enemies of Israel as well. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, Rome, and then the great movement of Antichrist against the church. They are the agents of Satan here. We can recognise the Antichrist throughout the last 2,000 years as well, perhaps through the Visigoths and the Vandals, the Mongol invasions, the Vikings, militant Islam, the Third Reich and communism, all of which have persecuted the church mercilessly. So the devil has definitely declared war on each age of the church, hasn't he?
Yes, he has, certainly. And this idea that is mentioned of Satan being thrown down from heaven, that's cropped up earlier in Scripture, hasn't it?
That's right, David. Isaiah the prophet spoke these words, talking about Lucifer. How you are fallen from heaven, O shining star, son of the morning. You have been thrown down to the earth, you who destroyed the nations of the world. For you said, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. Instead, you will be brought down to the place of the dead. But there's also that wonderful and triumphant statement by our Lord Jesus in Luke's Gospel, after the 72 returning disciples joyfully declared, Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name. And Jesus said, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And I suggest the same probably happens wherever the gospel is preached and people turn to Christ. The devil is being defeated, one person at a time.
Yeah, that's a really encouraging idea, to encourage us to share the gospel whenever we can. Well, the dragon is furious in defeat, but the God who saved the child and the woman from Satan's grasp will also save us, the people of Jesus, as we continue the conflict by preaching and proclaiming the gospel and doing the works of Christ. But as with Jesus, the victory that God gives us may well come through suffering, even through death. But ultimately no harm will come to us. And it seems that John is being careful here to name the terrors that those who read his book will face. He wants to equip the church, a church that seems so vulnerable, by encouraging them. That means putting courage into them to face the dangers without fear. And indeed, that's how the early Christians faced the persecution that the devil threw at them through Rome, and faced it without being intimidated. Often they were filled with joy, even as they died for Christ. Here in Britain today, it is actually all too easy, I think, for us to forget about this war, to be oblivious to it. But in other parts of the world, and indeed in the UK also, if we're prepared to recognise it, this conflict is all too real. Richard, you've had experience of living in Nepal and other parts of the world. Have you seen this conflict more in evidence?
Certainly have, yes. Open Doors actually estimates that there are about 380 million Christians in our present day and age who are at risk of persecution. When I was in Nepal, the power of darkness was really, really strong. Wherever you went, there were temples and idols and fanatical worship of deities, far too many and numerous to mention. And the church was also persecuted a lot in the 1970s when I was first there. It's possible that you would have been imprisoned for 3 years if you converted from Hinduism. If you baptized people who had been converted, you faced a 6-year imprisonment. I remember one courageous Christian, Harry Tapper, who was put in prison for his faith. but he carried on witnessing. And so many people turned to Christ while he was in prison that the authorities let him go in desperation, saying he's doing more harm in prison than he was out in the world. So that's an example of the zeal and passion of so many persecuted Christians. And we must remember that the church grows exponentially when churches are persecuted. Our son was expelled from China in 2018, and Xi Jinping began a wave of persecution against the church in China. Sinicization, he called it, where Christianity was denounced as a non-Chinese religion. And so leaders have been arrested, churches have been closed, the Bible is restricted, and foreign workers were all expelled. And so that's just one other example that I'm familiar with, but it's happening all over the world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And perhaps we'd like to think that because we're on God's side, we have his power protecting us, which is true, of course. But as Jesus said to his followers, the world may kill you, but not a hair of your head will perish. That's the reality of the protection. It doesn't stop us suffering under persecution. And I think this is a hard lesson for the church to learn. And through history, we haven't always got it right. Even today, there are some sections of the church that have allied themselves to political power in a way that seems to me, anyway, to overlook the way of Jesus. St. Paul is in no doubt about the reality of Satan's presence on earth. In Ephesians 6, he talks about how we should engage in the conflict. Now, we may have to stand up sometimes to other people, even at times expose what they're doing if it's works of darkness. We may have to call out the authorities and risk their censure or even sanctions against us. But it's not personal, it's the ideas behind what they are advocating that we resist. As St. Paul said in Ephesians, we are not fighting against flesh and blood. And so here's a suggestion. Before you openly criticise or oppose an authority figure, make sure that you pray for them. But what we mustn't do is retreat into a holy bubble where we just keep ourselves apart from all evil and become non-combatants in the war. This year is the 70th anniversary of the 5 missionary martyrs in Ecuador. And I found a great quote from Jim Elliot, one of those martyrs, on the subject of being active in the battle. He was urging people to get off the sidelines and take up the battle. He said, "We are spiritual pacifists, non-militants, conscientious objectors in this battle to the death with principalities and powers in high places, content to sit by and leave the enemies of God unchallenged. The world cannot hate us, we're too much like its own. Oh, that God would make us dangerous." For Jim Elliot and his 4 friends seeking to bring the good news of Jesus to the Waodani tribe in Ecuador 70 years ago, the battle involved making themselves vulnerable, and as some of you may know, they were all killed. So was that a defeat for the gospel? Far from it. Jim Elliot's widow went with her infant daughter shortly afterwards to live among the very tribe that killed her husband. And Rachel Saint, the widow of Nate Saint, who was the pilot in that group, another of the martyrs, she introduced her son Peter to the tribe some time later. And Peter asked the very man who had murdered his father, but had now become a Christian, to baptize him in the spot where his father was murdered. I think probably Peter only realized that it was the same man at the time of his baptism. He was about 15. But this is the victory of good over evil, but it often involves sacrifice. So here's another question for groups. What are the areas where we might be tempted to compromise rather than face the cost of standing up against the majority? And now Breda is going to read to us chapter 13, verses 1 to 18.
Then I saw another beast come up out of the earth. He had 2 horns like those of a lamb, but he spoke with the voice of a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast, and he required all the earth and its people to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. He did astounding miracles, even making fire flash down to earth from the sky while everyone was watching. And with all the miracles he was allowed to perform on behalf of the first beast, he deceived all the people who belong to this world. He ordered the people to make a great statue of the first beast, who was fatally wounded, and then came back to life. He was then permitted to give life to this statue so that it could speak. Then the statue of the beast commanded that anyone refusing to worship it must die. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. And no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Wisdom is needed here. Let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666.
So here we have 3 beasts. We've got the dragon, furious from his failures. He's standing by the sea. And then out of the sea comes a weird 7-headed beast with 10 horns, each bearing a crown. It seems to have been cobbled together from leftover bits of a leopard, a bear and a lion. There's almost an element of caricature in John's description, but the dragon gives his authority to this second beast. I don't think it would have taken long for John's churches in Asia Minor to put their own name to this beast, Richard.
No, it's pretty clear that this coded vision was for the church to recognise the many Roman Caesars who blasphemed God by claiming deity to themselves and compelling worship. What's interesting to me here is that it was a leopard's appearance, the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. Though very similar to Daniel's vision in chapter 7 verse 19 to 25 of the 4th beast, who also waged war on God's saints, this figure combined all of the elements of the 3 empires, which reminds me of the fact that Rome conquered Persia, Greek, Assyria, and assimilated their religions, their deities, and their armies into its own forces. Apparently there were 3 Roman soothsayers who, after the death of Nero by suicide, had prophesied that he would recover and return to power. And so the story was circulating around the empire. 3 impostors actually claimed to be him, but were denounced. Christians may have interpreted Domitian as this new wave of persecution and saw him as a returning Nero. The lie of the devil is that he has power to control human destiny, but here the sovereign hand of God is protecting his people from being destroyed. The power of the state to kill people is a total illusion. God seals believers for eternity.
Eugene Peterson, in his commentary on Revelation, says that we tend to overestimate the politics of Rome and underestimate the politics of grace. So then we have the 3rd beast coming from the earth. This is verses 11 to 18. And if the 2nd beast's tactics are intimidation, the 3rd beast's tactics are deception. It says that clearly in verse 14. And I see him as typical of pseudo-religion, a religion that allies itself to political power. This beast tries to make people worship, not worship God, but worship the beast from the sea. Ultimately, the devil longs for worship. Do you remember when he tempted Jesus? He said, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world if you'll just fall down and worship me. And sadly, over the centuries, the strategy of deception leading to a corruption of worship has not been without success. The Christians in John's time were being tempted to offer worship to Caesar as a god. John wanted them to stand up against that temptation, not fall for that deception. But the deception tactic is still quite evident today. Whenever you see religion, even Christianity, allying itself with political authority, Christians beginning to use the tactics of force and compulsion given by the state to enforce a so-called Christian agenda, beware. That is not the way Jesus won the victory. And so in verse 10, we have the clarion call. It's a reminder. God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. The way of sacrificial love is the way to true victory in the kingdom of God.
Yes, there's a bit of metaphor going on all the time, and the Romans seem to have liked their puzzles, and it was common for them to actually use numbers in their secret messages. It's been discovered in Pompeii, for example, a message that says, I love her whose name is 545. So perhaps there was a secret romance going on in that place. The Hebrew gematria system of numbering uses the letters of Neron Caesar, which is Julius Caesar, to add them up to 666, which is, wonder whether John is calling for wisdom that people might recognise Nero again in this. However, I think, more generally speaking, most people see it as Antichrist, don't they, David? This is an imperfect number.
Yes, I think John says that we should use our heads, doesn't he? He says, really, we've got to figure out what this 666 means. And Eugene Peterson, in his commentary Reverse Thunder, says this, get its number. This is a human number. This is not divine mystery, but a confidence man's patter. It is religion that makes a show, religion that vaunts itself, religion that takes our eyes off the poor and suffering and holy Christ. In the language of numbers, 666 is a triple failure to be 777, the 3 times perfect whole divine number. I remember the kite mark that used to appear on some UK goods some decades ago, I think. I don't know if you get it now. But I think it was a warranty that the goods had met the BSI standards of quality. It was like a mark of success, if you like. But the mark of the beast is the opposite, a mark of failure, the failure to be the genuine. So beware of religion that does not bear the true mark, humility, purity, sacrifice. There is an appropriate way for God's people to approach human politics. It is to respect and pray for the powers that be as appointed by God. The New Testament makes that quite plain. Whether we think those powers are good or bad or indifferent. But then to bravely call them out for evil, but also to honour them in all that is good. And to be the best possible citizens that we can be, whilst remembering that we actually belong to an eternal and holy kingdom that will outlive all others. We finish today with a brief look at 2 much more inspiring pictures. Let's listen to chapter 14, verses 1 to 7.
Then I saw the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him were 144,000, who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of mighty ocean waves, or the rolling of loud thunder. It was like the sound of many harpists playing together. This great choir sang a wonderful new song in front of the throne of God and before the 4 living beings and the 24 elders. No one could learn this song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. They have kept themselves as pure as virgins, following the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been purchased from among the people of the earth as a special offering to God and to the Lamb. They have told no lies. They are without blame. And I saw another angel flying through the sky, carrying the eternal good news to proclaim to people who belong to this world, to every nation, tribe, language and people. Fear God, he shouted, give glory to him, for the time has come when he will sit as judge. Worship him who has made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all the springs of water.
Now, we don't have time to dwell on these verses in detail, but they're a breath of fresh air and beauty after the horror pictures that we've been looking at. We've seen these 144,000 before, haven't we, Richard?
Yes, in chapter 7 we read about the 144,000 who seemed to be from the tribes of Israel, but they were also part of a greater crowd from all nations, tribes and languages. And here, though the same number is used, it makes it clear in verse 4 that it's probably referring to the global church, because it says they have been purchased from among the people of the earth.
Bearing in mind that this 144,000 can be seen to represent the whole people of God, I think that I see here also that when we are at worship in our churches, in our chapels, wherever we are, whether there's a lot of us or just a few of us, we are going into the very presence of God. We are the followers of the Lamb. God's name is stamped on our foreheads, and we are coming before him to worship. So here's another question. When you worship, do you see it as just a group of people in a building singing hymns and praying and listening to the Bible? Or do you sense it is much bigger? To what extent are we able to enter into the heavenly dimension of earthly worship? And perhaps the universal and eternal dimensions? Are we joined with others around the world? Or even those who have gone before? What do you think? What do you experience? And then in verses 6 and 7 we have the eternal good news. Here is the Great Commission again. The proclamation is being made by an angel, and it reminds me that whenever we proclaim Christ as the King and Saviour, we have the power of heaven behind our witness. The goal of this good news is that all the world will worship. Just like the prophet Habakkuk foresaw, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And that's a great note on which to close this episode. Thanks again, Richard. It's been a joy to share these podcasts with you.
Thank you, David. What a powerful part of Revelation this is, and how important that we take this book seriously today.
So do join us for episode 7. In the meantime, leave any feedback or questions on the feedback section of the website. So goodbye and God bless you.